On today's episode of Laser Radio, we're talking with Kurt Stockton, former road national champion back in 1990. He then moved to a long career in the mountain bike racing, the Norba circuit, and then came back to the road as both a team owner and director. Now making a venture into the gravel world. We'll talk about that. But first, this episode is brought to you by the Laser Bullet Helmet, the perfect combination of aerodynamics and ventilation. The Bullet is designed with a narrow front profile and smooth top section with minimal venting for maximum aerodynamic benefit. The air slide system allows for ventilation on demand with a quick and easy adjustment of the front vent cap. Compatible with both the Laser LifeBeam integrated heart rate monitor system and the Laser inclination sensor position monitor, the Bullet is available in both standard and MIPS versions. In stock and available now, visit your local Laser dealer for more information on the Laser Bullet. Kurt, thanks for joining us today. We got a lot to talk about. You have had a wide, diverse career in the cycling industry, from the road to the dirt, from a rider to a manager. I want to start with, I guess, as a rider on the road, you got your start in a kind of interesting way in road racing. I understand it was part of a school curriculum for you growing up in Santa Barbara. Is that right?
That's true. Well, first of all, Brad, I just want to say thank you for having me on, and thanks to Laser and my good friend Chris Smith for getting this podcast going. I think it's a great way to get some history and some information out there to a lot of cyclists now who are out there and might not know where they came from. So I appreciate that.
Important stories.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually even back up before that, I did start road biking, as they call it, at Santa Barbara Middle School. But prior to that, I grew up in a family. My parents raced motocross in the 70s, early middle 70s, and so my brother and I grew up going out to the moto tracks. But when we were too young for that, we were on BMX bikes. Eventually got into motorcycles a bit, and then I think it was 1977, 78. My dad took a job with a Dutch company, and we moved over to Europe for a couple years. So with that, we didn't take all the motorcycles and everything over there, and started getting into playing soccer more. Saw a little bit of bike racing, and then when we came back from living in Europe. We came back, and I remember my mom talking to some of the other parents. It's like, hey, where are the kids going? Are they going to the junior high school in town, or what's up? And they said, oh, well, this school started, Santa Barbara Middle School. It's a great school for the kids, super small, student body, and they do these bicycle trips. So that is kind of how it started. So I got in. Went from riding BMX bikes and coming back and getting myself a 10-speed and went to this school. We did some bike trips. I loved it.
What were the trips like? I mean, like where would you guys go? Where would you ride?
Well, so I just did 9th grade at that school, and it was a 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And so we did have an orientation trip that was just a few days out in the Santa Ynez Valley, over there in Solvang. And did some riding trips and other stuff. But at the end of the year, we did a 2-week trip through Central California, where we rode bicycles almost every day. I mean, we had like these, vans and trailers and stuff that they hauled it around. But in the early days of that school, they didn't really have all that infrastructure. So we almost kind of rode from Santa Barbara. We were out in the Cuyama Valley. We were Morro Bay, all over the place, just riding these incredible roads that I relish the opportunity to go ride them now, this much later. But, that I really kind of got a love for road cycling then.
Yeah,
and
how
then
could you not, man?
Yeah. And then there was just, there was an amazing community in Santa Barbara of cyclists, national champions. There was a team out of Santa Barbara through the Santa Barbara Bicycle Club, which originally was the Nishiki team, and then it became the Centurion team, Centurion, Suntour, Shimano. But I mean, you had guys on that team, Larry Shields, Kent Bostic, Hal Tozer, guys like this who were, Kevin Lutz that were racing, legends back in those days. And even, a very young Roy Nickman started out with that team. Roy grew up just down the road in Ventura. So it was like, this perfect, convergence of events with the opportunities at the middle school and then the great community in town. And, we had a lot of mentors back then. We had, riders that would go out and you go ride with the older guys mostly. There were some women, but, still mostly men, which unfortunately the sport still is kind of that way. But these guys, they'd go out and help us and they wouldn't yell at you. I see a lot of people, they go out and they get deterred because everyone yells at them, and they would talk to us and, teach you how to ride in a pace line and how not to, don't use your brakes and bend your elbows and relax and do all that. And it was, it was just one of those things. And as a kid, you're just like, for me, it just clicked. And that's how it started.
You obviously had talent early on, or your talent was identified early on, because you were going to national team camps pretty early. By 1985, you were going to Colorado Springs.
Yeah, I think I did one of those camps, because by 85 I wasn't even a junior anymore. I know I did a junior camp out of the Springs, back in the Eddie B days, probably 82, 83. I remember,
So 85 would have been the start of your national team run.
Exactly. Yeah. So I remember going to those camps. You had to fill out a resume and mail it in. And then you waited to get the letter in the mail. Did I get selected or did I not? And I remember me and my best buddy Brian Perloff, we were both racing at the time. It's like, he got, I don't know, one of us got our letter before the other guy did, and then the other one took another day, and both waiting. But we both got in there, and I remember, went to one of those junior camps where they did all sorts of testing. You got to ride the infamous ergometer, and and meet all these riders who you'd only read about, because they brought riders in from all around the country. And, just kind of starting out and being out on the West Coast, you're familiar with the West Coast guys, but, not the guys from the Rockies or from the Midwest or out East. So it was quite an experience for sure.
I've been fascinated with this Legend series, hearing about how all these perfect things fall into place for the riders, because it was so difficult to become a pro back then. Like you talking about waiting for the letters. It's not like you can just look up someone's race results or see them on Zwift or Strava or whatever. All these crazy ways that we've seen riders be identified. It was really just like submit a letter and hope for the best and hope you get called back for the national team.
Yeah, and it was also, it was still even in the early 80s, it was still a pretty small community. Like, bike racing in the United States on skinny tires wasn't huge. So, anybody that was, had any type of results and had been in it for a while or had coached or managed a team, there was a pretty tight network. So, if you were working with people that, had connections, they could write you a letter of recommendation and do that. So in that respect, it's, you worked with what you had, just like now, there's a ton more there. But yeah, it's easy to look back and say, oh my gosh, it was so tough or so different, but that was the only way to do it. So it was like, you either did it or you didn't.
Right.
Yeah. So, but it was, yeah. You think back at that. I remember, by the time we got the call back, we could get a flight out there, but there were no flights home because it was like during winter break. I think I missed a little bit of school. Had to take the Greyhound bus home from Colorado Springs back to Santa Barbara. Boy, that was the first and last time I ever rode a Greyhound.
Yeah. I don't think they probably haven't gotten much better, to be honest.
Yeah.
So that takes you up to your quote-unquote pro debut, which I guess would be your first pro license in 1989?
Yeah, I did in 1985. I'll back you up a little bit. I got onto the 10-speed drive team, which was one of the bigger amateur teams in the time. At that time, the 711 had just gone pro. I think those guys went pro in 85 or 86. Mm-hmm. So it was one of the big amateur teams. I got on that team. I raced with guys like Kemp Ostick, Todd Gogolski, Andy Paulin, James Urbanis. Doug Smith won a national championship in 86 when we were on that team. So I was able to do 3 years on that the 10-speed drive team and got in a couple trips with the national team before getting a pro license in 1989. And back then, getting a pro license was paying the $500 to US Pro, which was Jack Symes and his secretary Doris, and they gave you a license. And that was it. I think it was $500, and then if you were on a what was a UCI registered team, it was twice that. So maybe it was $450 and $900 or something. And that was the criteria was that your check didn't bounce, basically.
Yeah. So who were you racing with as this pro in 1989? Do you have a team?
No, 1989 you could be an individual. So I was I was not an independent contractor. I mean, a privateer, whatever you want to call it, And ever since Eric Heiden, won that first Core States championship when Tom Schuler's shoe came unglued in the sprint and Eric won, I was like, that was the race for me. And I had watched that race, 85 Heiden and then Tom Pran and then 87, I don't know, 88 was Kiefel, and I'd watch these guys. I'm like, I want to go do that race.
So this was your race, talking about the Philly Classic, basically. It was the Core States U.S. Pro Championship when the national championship used to be awarded to existing road races instead of having a separate event. But you knew Philly was your jam. Yeah,
it was. I was... and that was it. I mean, I took out a pro license so that I could go race Philly. There were no other pro races. That was, there were, we had that there was a Tour of America and then the Tour of Americas. But I did it because I wanted to race Philly. And so I went, I bought a plane ticket and I went out there and raced Philly in 1989 because I just wanted to see what it was all about. And, I don't know if it was genetic or working hard, or probably both, but I always had really good endurance. So, doing a 156-mile race, it didn't faze me. That thought of doing that was like, okay, well, that's how the pros race. We'd watch these, or we wouldn't watch them. You'd, get your Cycling Weekly or whatever publications you got from Europe months later and read about these races and see these, these pictures of these guys racing over there. And you're like, well, yeah, this is our version of a classic in the U.S. And if you're going to, I figured if you were going to make it, you had to go do that race and do well.
Yeah.
And went for it.
Yeah. So that takes us to the 1990 edition where you won your U.S. Pro National Championship. Do you remember the race? Do you remember that day?
I do. I remember bits and pieces. I was actually on a domestic pro team that year, the American Commerce Bank team. So we were a team of 4 riders. So that tells you something, Three of us were from California, and we had one Danish guy on the team, and that was the team. And so we, I remember preparing for that event and doing my training rides. I remember going to the Mammoth stage race, the month before, and getting dropped in every stage because it was at altitude and it was a ton of climbing, and you had the likes of Alexi Graywell out there, drilling it at altitude, and it was miserable, but I knew I just had to, stick to my guns, and know that wasn't necessarily an indicator of how I would do at Philly. Didn't have a whole lot of people believing in me, but I did believe in myself. And we lined up that day with 4 riders, my younger brother, Darren being one of them, Kenny Adams and Peter Gilling. And we finished that day with 4 riders, and it was one of those things that it just, everything really, it does fall into place. I'm kind of a firm believer that you don't have good luck. You make your own luck. So we prepared properly, to the point where we were, hydrating a lot the days before. That was when Philly used to be in early June, Yep. Easy to be, 90 humidity in the 90s and temperatures at the same. So it was, a race of attrition. It wasn't until years later that there was finally a cool race and there was a big, massive field sprints years after year. And it was like, oh, this race isn't hard enough. It isn't hard enough. And it was like, just, you guys wait till you have a hot day and then see what happens. So
this is when it finished on the Parkway. It finished on the flat Parkway, not where it currently finished or used to finish on the Manayunk climb.
Correct.
It was a flat run-in I guess, downtown or close to downtown.
Yeah, well, there's been various starting and finishing circuits, and then the big loop. So yeah, it did. You started with a few of the short, flat circuits just around Benjamin Franklin Parkway there, and then you go out along Kelly Drive. I think it was 10 laps of 14 miles, so 140 miles, and then you got the difference in the short start and finishing circuits.
I'm reading the old press releases from the race from the 1990 Core States Classic. Photo finish between you and Andy Bishop. Do you remember waiting for that? I mean, do you remember waiting for the photo finish results?
No, I knew I had it.
The winner always knows.
Well, I mean, it was one of those things that the part, Brad, the one part that I do remember quite vividly was, the coming out of the circle down there at the end, and then you're, I don't know, 500 or 600 meters to the finish. We were in a group of 11 riders, I believe it was, and there had been selections had been made, on the wall coming back, and even on the small circuits, selections had been made. And I remember setting myself up so perfectly, and I was a type of sprinter that I was better going from further out. I wasn't like the explosive guy at the end. I could go and just keep winding it up and keep accelerating all the way to the line. Have myself set. I was ready to go. And unfortunately, there was this dude just to my right by the name of John Tomac, and John was in my way, and I was just like, oh man, I guess I just need to get out. I think I said, hey, JT, can I get out? Can I get out? And he wouldn't move. So I slammed into him a couple times, and Tomac was a solid dude. He could ride his bike. He wasn't letting me out. So as I backed out, I mean, this all happened in, a few seconds. As I was backing out to go around him, the sprint started. And so I still came around his rear wheel and came up, and, the two Euros who beat me, Paolo Cimini, who won the race, and Laurent Jalabert, who went on to have quite a career. Yeah. I remember coming across the line and going past both of them, but if you look at the finish, you look at the photo, it looks like I'm pretty far behind, but I was going forward. Right. And I found an old video of it recently and watched that, and the grainy, it looks like grainy surveillance footage of, whatever. I think someone videoed the TV coverage. I could see that, and I picked it out. I'm like, that's exactly it was as I remembered. So, but it was a day that we had to be super smart. We didn't have a team. We had a volunteer drive our team car for us, which was donated by the race. I do remember flatting in the race, and right toward the end, the last couple laps, getting a flat tire, and I have this ability to be able to whistle really loud without having to use your fingers or anything. And I remember my brother still tells me, he's like, dude, he goes, I was dying. He goes, and I just made it to the front. He goes, and I heard you whistle. He goes, I looked back, and sure enough, he waited for me. I got a wheel, got back up there, and that wasn't luck at all. That was teamwork.
He could recognize your whistle. That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, from when we were kids, right? Yeah. And he goes, that sounded like KS. And
that's so cool.
Yeah. So, we did that. And then, I had another teammate, Kenny Adams, came into that finishing, circuit with me in that group. Bishop was there. There were a lot of Americans in that group, Urbanus, Gary Mulder. I think Spago had 3 riders.
Yeah. Mulder, Oliver Starr, and James Urbanus. Looking at the top 10 right now.
Yeah, so it was one of those things where it just it came together, and it was it was then you cross the line, and then you're like, oh shit, that's what I just did. Yep. I hope I can say that on this podcast.
No, you're fine.
Yeah,
it's the internet, man.
Yeah, exactly. So that was that was really that was quite a day. It did, it afforded me some more opportunities in racing, but it was just, it's interesting. It's one of those things you do it and you're like, oh, okay. And, you're kind of only as good as your last result. But that's one of those things that has, over the years, it has stuck with me and people still remember that. So, that was pretty cool.
Was it a turning point at the time? I mean, did your career as a pro cyclist change dramatically after your national title, or did it feel like it changed?
It did a little bit. It was still, back then it was this kind of juggernaut of you 7-Eleven and Schwinn, and then Coors Light,
Right.
and then these other teams, and I mean, it was in the fact that a new team got started that next year, which was called AC Pinarello, and you probably haven't heard of this team because it had only made it a few months, but it was like, I was on that team, Urbanus was on that team, we had guys like Alan McCormick and Matt Eaton. It was a stacked team. Mike Neal was our team director.
Wow.
He was working to get us in the Giro that year. And as I understand it, and no one debates it, the guy who was running the team wasn't too smart about his relationship with a PR manager, and his wife found out about it, and she said either I go or the team goes, and that was the end of the team.
Wow.
And this guy was a financial planner. I think he's out of Fort Collins. He had access to good attorneys, and he basically just shut that team down, and we were all out of jobs. I mean, Thomas Craven was on that team, who now runs the Hollow Wesco. We had a guy, Herbert Niederberger, Swiss guy, who had gone on to win stage of the Tour of DuPont. So it was tough for us because this happened like in February.
Yeah.
So we were all out of work, and that was it. And so I think that was probably more of a turning point in the wrong direction, that team folding, than what the title did. Although that did get me on the Chevrolet LA Sheriffs in '91 and then to '92. So it ebbs and flows. I still took some trips to Europe with a small Austrian pro team in '91, the Varta team. Got to start, Tour of Luxembourg, Tour de Suisse. I got to race the Worlds in '90, from having that pro title, and then the next year, I was second to Davis Finney for the Jersey in '91. So I got to go do a little bit of that, and in hindsight, it's pretty interesting that I went over to Europe kind of at the when EPO was really kicking in.
Yeah.
You look back at that and I'm like, man, those races were hard. I just thought that's how hard it was. It's like, you can't just start and race, 200 to 230 kilometers every day from the gun.
Right.
But that's what was going on, and I just thought, I just got to train harder, and that was it. But it was, it was a good time, and I mean, it afforded me tons of great opportunities. I got to travel around the world, met a lot of great people. So, maybe as a life type of career thing, yeah, it helped. So
it's a good ride while it lasted. Then you make the natural progression to a downhill mountain biker racing the Norba circuit. Talk about that change. I mean, how'd you go from skinny tires to racing downhill?
Well, so that was after second year in '92 with Chevrolet Sheriff. Didn't get renewed, and so it was like, okay, what am I going to do? I still want to race. I still felt that I had some stuff to prove. I still felt that I could be competitive. So kind of raced as an independent rider again in '93, but also. A few years earlier, a guy by the name of John Parker had started a company called Yeti Cycles. An iconic brand in mountain biking. The first team to have a team, the first box truck. John started originally from Santa Barbara before he moved the business down to Agoura. So we'd always see him coming in the shop. Hey, I'm starting this mountain bike company, this and that. He was friends with the guy who ran the bike shop in Santa Barbara, a guy named Doug Knox, and so I had met John through that, and then mountain biking was getting bigger, and it was like, hey, how's this mountain bike thing going? Can we come and race for you? And it was like, yeah, so we went and did it, and just got on with Yeti, and of course I was like, well, I'm a road racer, I should be racing cross country, so I got into cross country racing with those guys, 92, and then really more, a little bit in 92, but really like in 93 and 4. And that was mostly the days other than the Cactus Cup event, which was outside of Scottsdale. Most mountain bike races back then were at high altitude ski resorts.
Right.
And you were competing against the likes of, Dave Weens and Ned Overend and Tim Gould, these guys that could go uphill all day. And it was just miserable coming from sea level. I would just suffer. And then I'd hit the downhills, and I think being a sprinter and, growing up with the motocross and the BMX background, had good bike handling skills. And I would pass people on the downhills, and then I'd, get passed back on the uphills, and I'd pass them on the downhills. Well, Yeti was the first kind of downhill team out there. They went from, having, Don Meyer as the cross country, world champion on their team to becoming an all downhill team. So all of a sudden, I'm like looking around, you've got, guys like Jimmy Deaton, you've got Missy Giove, you got Miles Rockwell, the best downhillers in the country, and a couple of them going on to be world champions on that team. So there was this huge van full of bikes, and I was like, hey, can I try some of this downhilling? You guys got all these extra bikes. So I think I got to borrow Jimmy's second or third bike and started doing runs at downhill events. And back then too, you got to realize that like a big downhill bike was like 3 inches of travel.
Yeah.
We were still on 2.1 or 2.2 inch 26-inch tires. There was a lot of pedaling. The courses were a lot longer. We had a course in Vail that was like 15 minutes long, so it did, or it could lend itself to someone who had some pedaling ability and bike handling skills. So I was like, you know what, this is great. I can do all this downhill stuff and I don't have to suffer going uphill. And so that's kind of how that whole thing got started, is doing that and the opportunities that were there and seizing them. And, at that point in the middle 90s, in mountain biking, the sport was it was going through the roof.
Yeah. This is prime time for mountain biking in the United States.
Yeah. I think we were talking before we started recording here. It was like, that was when every mountain bike company was spending, more money than they had, but they had backers or whatever. And, there were races everywhere. I mean, we went and raced in Hawaii. We did a downhill stage race in Hawaii one year. I mean,
I can't imagine you were missing road racing a whole lot while you were doing this.
Yeah, exactly. You're supporting yourself for the most part when you're traveling, but it was this really cool opportunity. And it kind of, the best way I described it was that it was kind of like being a kid all over again, in that, I remember, first time I got on a BMX bike and started going around a track and going off jumps, I was like, wow, that was, so fun. Got into road racing. It was that, it kind of became a job, but it was still great. But then being on mountain bikes again and the innovation and the equipment and the courses, going to Mammoth Mountain and going to Mount Snow, Vermont and going to Big Bear and going to all these amazing places that were, Vail and Park City. And the organizers were putting these great courses together, and it was just like, you got to go to a ski resort in the summer for 5 or 6 days for the week, and stay in these beautiful condos and race our bikes. It was really was cool.
It's a whole lot better than piling into a van and sleeping on someone's floor for a road race, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean that was all part of it too. I think you have to do that to get there. I think that kind of goes back to what you guys are doing with this podcast. It's like you got to know where you came from to appreciate where you are, and that was part of it. But yeah, definitely, I don't need to pile into a van and sleep on someone's floor anymore.
So then you kind of you stayed in the industry as you stopped racing and moved into the business side of the sport. Talk about that transition from downhill mountain bike racer to, I assume, working for brands that you had met during your racing career.
Yeah. And the brand that I worked for the most was Time Sport, and Time was known for the first clipless floating pedal, and the first company that came out with white road shoes. If you remember back in the late 80s, white shoes with red straps, and it was brilliant because in any photograph you could pick these shoes out, and you couldn't even pick out the rider. Yeah. So I was very fortunate to get. Start a relationship with Time when they first came into the U.S. in late '87 into '88, and had personal friendship with the owner of the company, Roland Catan, who we lost a couple years ago, unfortunately. But Roland was always super supportive when I raced on the road, and then when I got into mountain biking, Time came out with their first mountain bike pedal before the attack pedal, and it was a single-sided pedal, and it had a proprietary bolt pattern that wasn't SPD compatible, and it was like a complete flop. And then they came out with the attack pedal, and right when that pedal came out was right when I was pretty much ready to be done racing mountain bikes, racing downhill. And I say that I knew I was done to racing downhill, because you would fall often in training. You'd go to the venues several days before race day, and you'd do practice runs. You'd walk the course, and then you'd ride the course, and you'd fall every day. You'd probably fall at least once. Every once in a while you'd crash, but falling was like, hey, you're wearing your gear, you get back up and you ride. And I noticed, a few years in, I'd go from, falling and being fine the next day, to falling and being sore the next day, to falling and being sore for 2 days, to falling and being sore on race day. And I was like, you know what, I'm ready to kind of get done with this. The courses were starting to get a bit gnarlier, more of what people know as downhill now. And so I pitched a proposal to Time that they needed someone to, help market this new pedal, which was just amazing. The pedal worked well in mud. There were no off-road pedals at that time that worked well in mud. And the Time pedal, you could walk through a mud hole and clip right in and go. So I kind of created a position that I knew only I could fill, and was still racing at that time. I think this was in 97. I raced up until the middle of 98. Mountain biking. Mm-hmm. So I was able to come in at a pretty, very competitive, like I can do this for this much money. I didn't need, a ton, because I was still making some money racing my bike, with the idea that I could transition forward and build this. And that happened. And then in 1988, I was at a World Cup downhill at Big Bear Lake, up above the Inland Empire there, up above San Bernardino, and doing a training run. And came around a corner and had one of those things where you fall, except I fell and I put my my right leg into a big hole that you couldn't see because it was covered with pine needles or whatever. And it went up, most of the way to my knee that my leg went in, and then I fell over. Oy. And I tore my MCL in my knee, and that was the last day I raced a mountain bike. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I a guy you might know, photographer Jim Safford, was Jim was in that corner, and he told me, weeks later, he goes, I heard this terrible loud pop when you did that. He knew, and that was it. I went down the mountain in I think in the back of a pickup truck or whatever it was, and went to the hospital, and I was like, all right, I'm ready to start working full time. Yeah. So went to work with Time.
Yeah, so you're in this office job. You're working as close to a regular job as you're going to get in the cycling industry, and then competitive cycling kind of sucks you back in with this weird confluence of events with what was the Sierra Nevada Cliff Bar team.
Yeah, so I had been working for Time, and fortunately that real job, the office was on the other side of the living room from my bedroom, so the commute wasn't that bad.
Sweet.
Yeah, because it was, at that point, Time.
Yeah, they probably didn't have an office yet, did they?
They didn't. They had a subsidiary early on, and then they closed that down. So I worked with France. So it was either early in the morning or late at night. We had fax machines back then. Email was starting up. Yeah, and so as I was taking care of sponsorship for Time in North America, like what the French called promotion. So it was working with the race teams, the individual athletes. Road, off-road, we still had the attack pedal, which was huge, triathlon as well. And in 2003, I, approached what was, or going into 2003 season, so 2002, approached what was the Sierra Nevada team. They became Sierra Nevada Cliff Bar in 2003, came in to be the bike sponsor. So they rode Time bikes, they rode Time shoes, Time pedals. And I went out and I found all the components for the bikes. I put the whole bike together, even though we didn't make all the parts, and started that relationship with that team. And as fate would have it, in 2003, about halfway through that year, Tom France decided that my position was no longer needed. And right at that same point, I was offered the position to manage the team for Sierra Nevada, because Ken Grossman, who owned Sierra Nevada, and the woman Leslie Graceland, who was in the finance department, they were running the team on their spare time. And as it was growing, in the early 2000s, pro cycling in the U.S. was getting bigger. We had the Tour of Georgia. Then we had this Tour of Missouri starting up. There were more races coming around, and they're like, "Hey, Kurt, you've done well as a sponsor." And I was kind of hands-on as a sponsor because I felt like we could be better represented as a company, and we weren't getting that from them. And so they just liked what I was doing and offered me that position, and I jumped right on it. And I thought if I do a really good job, maybe after 2004, I could take this whole thing over and run it myself. Well, it wasn't but a few months later that Ken came back to me and said, "Hey, Kurt, how would you like to just take this whole thing over and you take the business over and run the team?"
Wow.
And so it was like from instead of 18 months, I swear it was like 3 or 4 months, and I was like, boom, formed my own LLC and went head into it. Called people I knew. I called up Tom Schuler, who had the very successful Saturn program. I said, "Hey, Tom, I'm doing this. What should I do?"
Yeah, what do I do?
And Tom gave me a ton of time. Little did I know that team was going away.
All right.
At the end of 2003, they went away. I ended up, with that, I ended up getting a Trent Klasnum on the team. I ended up getting Eric Wolberg on the team. So we did get some pretty instant legitimacy with adding these high-profile riders that came out and won some big races for us straight away, and I just jumped right into it. And then of course in your mind the natural progression is we got to grow this thing. It's got to we got to get bigger. We need more money. We got to do this. Well, Sierra Nevada, they were happy putting in what they put in, but they didn't have the desire or the resources at that point to put any more in. So I ended up starting up a conversation with Robin Zellner, who was managing the O-Photo team back then. And he basically told me the same thing with what was going on there. It's like, hey, we've got this much money. They can't put any more in right now. And oh, by the way, O-Photo's getting bought by Kodak. What do you think if we can combine resources? So I was like, well, this sounds like a great idea, right?
Yeah.
More money always sounds right.
Win-win.
Right, win-win. And then so many times after the fact, you hear of all these stories how, oh man, these partnerships went bad. Well, it took a little while convincing for Ken to let Sierra Nevada, the brand that he had built, be associated with a big corporate brand. But we were able to do that and address the concerns he had. And Zellner and I formed a partnership. And we had a great 3-year run with Kodak Gallery Sierra Nevada, until 2007, when the whole economy, we know what happened there, and we know with Kodak that they were still embracing film and didn't embrace digital at that point. And Kodak pulled out, and Sierra Nevada, still wasn't willing to write the size check we needed, and so we ran through 2007, and then that was the end of it. But go ahead.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
But I was going to say, in those years, 2005, 2006, 2007, we raced the Tour of Georgia. We raced the first Tour of California in 2006. I had Jesse Anthony with his first pro contract. We gave that to him. Jackson Stewart, who's now a director at BMC. I had both of the Jacques Maines brothers in 2003, and then Ben did 3 years with us. Had some riders that went on to do some great things. Dominique Roland, the French Canadian. He came and raced with us in 2007. We went over to Ireland and raced the Ross and won 3 stages with him over there. So we had some great results. Got to travel around and met people, and we're kind of at the dawn of what I say is we actually have some big time bike racing, or it's ebbed and flowed in the States, with the Tour of California being the pinnacle of that. But it was cool to be at the start of that, and and build relationships, and there's memories that we have and people we've met, that will go on forever, and that was One thing that was really cool about that is, pretty much everyone had a digital camera at that point, even though we didn't have them in our phones. So there's a lot of photos out there. We don't have to go scan old black and white, and we find that stuff. So yeah, that was really, it was a good time, and then that whole thing happened with the economy, and I was like, I kind of felt like I needed a break. So that did happen.
Man, what a run though. You go from representing a brand to directing a team to owning a team in less than a year, so 6 months, I guess. And then that turns into a 3-year run with the Kodak Gallery Sierra Nevada team. I mean, yeah, that just blows my mind.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. It was pretty wild for sure.
So, but then you came back into the sport in, I guess, 2009 with the Now MS Society team. Sort of a reboot for you. Talk about how that came about.
Yeah. Well, I had, a little background. In 2008, I contracted Lyme disease, and I didn't figure it out until 2009. So I was down and out. I was in the dumps, and I finally got this Lyme thing kind of like, this is what's happening. Now I got to deal with it. I'd love to get back into cycling. And I got a call from my buddy Steve Haig one day, and he's like, "Hey dude," he goes, you want to get involved with this development team, out of LA called, Now MS Society. Is my friend, Ken Yamakoshi over at Park Pre Bicycles. He's on their club. They're looking for someone to help them at, I think we went to Redlands, maybe went to a couple of events, a bunch of, young kids, and do you need help doing that? And I met those people, and I was like, yeah, this would be cool. I'd love to jump back into it. I still think I have a lot to offer. I always liked, working with the younger riders, and working with the riders. And if I back up to 2007, that was the year that I really got to direct more than manage.
Right.
With Zellner as a partner, I did the books and the contracts, but he did a lot of the travel and the day-to-day stuff. So I really enjoyed working the riders. I'm like, well, this is a great opportunity to work with riders and some younger riders who, basically have no clue. And they had no clue, but I had no clue when I started. So I was like, I would like to, be able to give something back to these guys. So I did that in 2009 and in 2010. And during that time, I had met, you say it was the Now MS Society. Now was an acronym, or is an acronym for No Opportunity Wasted. And there was a guy named Phil Kogan, who's the host of a show on CBS called The Amazing Race.
Sure.
Phil and his brand Now, and then his wife Louise, they were the ones behind that brand. And I met him, because I was working with this dev team. Phil's wife, Louise, did a little bit of racing, with the younger women on the team as well. So I met her, and we got to talking, and we're like, hey, what about, is this something that you see we could, make bigger? And Phil's a Kiwi, so he had some connections with Bike New Zealand. 2010, if you remember back then, it was the Kiwis and the U.S. women that were, going head to head in the team pursuit. That was a big thing back then, and before the Brits came in and crushed everybody. And so Phil had some connections with Bike New Zealand. So originally he's like, I go, why don't we start a women's team? I said, I think there's a ton of opportunity here. No pun intended. And so we originally were going to have a combined Kiwi U.S. team. Phil had some connections through the Multiple Sclerosis Society, and that's the Now MS. That was where that came from. And we got introduced to Novartis Pharmaceuticals. So we were going to launch this team in 2011, and it just took a while to come together. The first race, ironically, that I did with the, from Now MS, the dev team, I started this pro women's team. First race we did was Philly in 2011. That was our debut event. And I just thought it was like, how ironic is that? So I was still helping with the dev team, but also launched this women's team in 2011. Our sixth race in, Robin Farina, who is my life partner, she goes and wins the national championships in Augusta.
Oh yeah, I remember.
So
this.
we went from being this no-name team. I got 6 riders. I put I met Robin the fall before at the Best Buddies ride from Carmel down to Hearst Castle. Met Robin. She got me in touch with Ann Samplonius. And we got just 4 other riders. Had a 6-rider team. We went and did that. Went and Robin won the national championship. We ended up winning races all over the place that first year. No one expected any of this to happen. I thought we would do well, and it gelled. And I learned a lot about running a women's team, which was so much different from running a men's team. The best way I can describe it is that running a men's team is to me was more like running a day-to-day business where you clock in, you do your work, and you clock out.
Sure. Running
a women's team was more of running a family and having that synergy and that dynamic, more of a family dynamic. And that worked really well for me. I figured that out early. I mean, not to say that the women on this team weren't all business when it was race time, but they all truly enjoyed hanging out with each other as well. Where I can say with the men's teams, the guys could clock in and race, and then I don't want to room with him. I don't want to room with him. The women, it was definitely more of a family dynamic, and we really gelled. And very fortunate the next year, picked up Allison Powers. Ended up we won. We won in those next 2 years. I think we won Redlands. I think one year Allison won Redlands and won 4 of the 5 stages on our team. And the riders were all committed because everyone would do their job and we were getting results. We had Addie Albershart. She was, won junior titles. They sent riders to the world championships. From a race side, we did great. We were raising awareness for people fighting MS. Had the riders doing rides on tandems partnered with someone who had MS on off weekends and going to these rides and doing that. And it was just it was a really it was a good time,
and successful too. I mean,
successful.
It's always more fun when you're winning, for sure.
Oh yeah, it makes it a lot more enjoyable. Makes all the late nights and that hard work easier to forget.
Right.
Yeah.
But all good things must come to an end. That ends, and you spent some time working in the event world. I guess the only thing that you hadn't done yet in cycling. You were an athlete. You managed teams for men's and women's teams, and now you're kind of living in the event world. Talk about what you're up to today.
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right on that. I did. I got into Robin. So at the end of the Now Novartis program, Robin and Janelle Holcomb spearheaded an organization called the Women's Cycling Association, which was to bring more awareness and some equality to women's racing in the U.S. and eventually worldwide. And when that launched, Robin was doing a lot of interviews, speaking to a lot of people, and looking back now, I made the unwise decision. I don't know, unwise, but I tried to launch the Tour of Montana. Had a connection up there. We're going to put on an event up there. In hindsight, this was 2015, was not a good time to try to start a new bike race, as we've seen the decline in bike racing. But it did expose me more to the event side, rekindled that relationship with Sierra Nevada. I felt, that I had a lot to offer to events because in all the traveling and doing this for so many years, I can say I've been to a lot of events, and I've been to a few good events. And so I wanted to be able to put on a good event. And myself, and that the Tour of Montana didn't, we ended up putting on an event up there and a Fonda the next year, but it was, as I realized, you can't put on an event in a location that you don't live unless you got a ton of money to hire other people. Yeah. And so I started riding more. I live in Nevada City, California, and moved into town 3 years ago. I lived 15 years outside of town, moved into town, and we have just the most amazing network of old Forest Service roads, decommissioned mining roads, logging roads. You can leave the house and ride all day and never see a signal, and maybe be on pavement for 3 miles in each direction and just go and go.
Yeah.
And I really made some great.
I'll say a lot of people are starting to realize that may be the most fun way to ride your bike.
Yeah, especially, think of me, right? Going from road racing to downhill, and now I get to go ride around on drop bar bikes on dirt. It's like, it's awesome. Yeah, so I got in, and when this whole thing in Montana was going down, I came up with this concept and this name, Gourmet Gravel. And I'm like, Gourmet Gravel. I said, the roads are so nice. I said, but we also like to get done and enjoy some good food, drink some quality craft beer, and do that. And so I launched that, or I came up with that idea. And then just this past year in 2017, I put on my first 2 Gourmet Gravel events. I had plans to put them on up in Montana. I had done countless hours, days, weeks up there, scouting courses. I had a course in whitefish that was quite amazing, and I'd love to do something with that someday. And even in Butte, that didn't come through, so I brought that back to California and put on my first event in Nevada City this past summer, and then did one in the fall in Santa Barbara, my hometown. And my concept is somewhat simple, but it's like I want to have events in places where the destination is the town. The destination isn't a campground somewhere, or isn't somewhere way out that's difficult to get to, that if you're not riding, there's nothing else to do. I want to source the food, and get it produced locally, and have, local coffee, local beer, local wine. Was able to do that at both of these events. It's been a lot of fun. Moving on into 2018, I'm actually going to have the second annual Gourmet Gravel Nevada City on May 12th. But I did do is I partnered with an organization up here that a riding buddy of mine has been involved with, Big Brothers Big Sisters. Sure. So Big Brothers Big Sisters of Nevada County in North Lake Tahoe, they have done a fundraising ride. This will be their 20th year. It had been a mountain bike ride until last year when they decided to switch to gravel, mostly because we had such a horrendous winter last year as far as the trails go, that a lot of the trails got destroyed and they couldn't really do the route. I helped them a little with that, and then I did my event a month later last year, and it's like, hey, you know what? Why don't we just combine our resources and do this and make it happen? And we have quite a calendar of events here in Northern California too, and so working with them and changing the date to a month earlier allows us to flow in the calendar well. And we're looking at having quite a spectacular event. I just came from a meeting this morning with our local brewery, Old Republic Brewing Company here in Nevada City. They're hosting the event for the second year. They're in the process of opening up a roadhouse with, the kitchen. So they might do some of the food for us, depending on that. And it's just, for me, it's exciting because I want people to come in and see what Nevada City has to offer as far as riding goes, and come up here when we're not putting events on. But, what better way to get people introduced to it than, give them a route, give them a venue, provide them with, coffee that's roasted here in town, fresh baked goods, send them out on the ride. It's a ride. It's not a race. Although, as I say, in human nature, you put a number on someone on a bicycle, they're going to race each other.
It's a race. Yeah. The joke about when the first bike race happened, right? It was right after the second bike was invented.
Yeah, there we go. That's about right. Yeah, and then you slap numbers on, and then you've got a bunch of people. So we're going to do that, and I just encourage people to come out and enjoy it and make some new friends, and check it out, because ultimately, we all have to support each other in cycling, because even as much as it's grown, in the 38 years I've been doing it, is we still have to support each other. And as soon as we start fighting against each other for, little pieces of a little pie, it doesn't turn out well. So, I'm glad that I still ride as much as I can, and I've been going to, some other events just to go talk to people, to see what people are doing right, to see what they're doing wrong. How can I improve? Because with the events I'm putting on, the only thing I can do is get better, and I have to keep innovating. So I want to do that. And, you get to meet new people, people that I raced with, there's that might not ride. People that ride now never raced when I was, but I'm meeting new people all the time, and so we all speak that common language of riding bicycles and enjoying that because it's voluntary. It's a choice that we make, and so what better way to get around like-minded people? And you never know who you're going to meet. You never know how they might be able to help the cycling community.
Sure.
Short term, long term, and so as our whole society changes and as gasoline is eventually just going to get more and more expensive, we need to get out and do that stuff. Whether we're out doing these rides, whether it's people commuting. I mean, Nevada City, I don't know if you probably were here for the Tour of California for a start, but probably didn't really see around town, but you sat in downtown. That's like every road around here. It either goes up or it goes down. There's nothing flat around here. But an amazing place to ride, and the equipment now is such that you can, even with a little bit of fitness, you can ride up just about anything if you got enough gearing. So, yeah, that's been a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to bringing more people here into Nevada City. Working with Big Brothers Big Sisters is great. I think we're gonna probably do an event in Truckee in the fall, and then also be back in Santa Barbara in the fall doing that. So,
right on.
Yeah, it's been really pretty cool.
Getting back to what matters, riding bikes, eating good food, loving each other.
Yeah.
Doesn't get much better than that.
Oh, it doesn't.
Right on. Well, I'm going to come May 12th, right?
Yeah.
All right. I'm putting it on the calendar. gourmetgravel.com for more information.
You got it.
All right. Kurt, thanks so much for joining us, man. We really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Brad, and thanks again to Laser for making this happen.
It's an honor to have another legend here on the Laser Legend series. That'll do it for us today. Thanks to Kurt Stockton for joining us on today's show. See you next time.